All right, Ben, this one's for you. So, throwing in my 2 cents on this NT kind of hangout video that you had, and I guess I get to pretend like I was there, like I was participating. So, let's kind of start with some of this because I had some of my own comments to kind of throw in here. Again, love Kiersey. I'm a fan, but I do have my own comments. And apart from that, I also got my own book to refer to here just in case I need to flip through it. But here we go. All right. So, just starting with the page that we have here on the screen. Strategy having to do with ways and means necessary to sufficiently achieve well-defined goal, but not just any goal is of interest to rationals. Invariably, the goal that rationals set for themselves is increasing the efficiency of systems. Some rationals concern themselves mainly with social systems like families and companies, while others concerned with organic systems like plants and still others mechanical systems, computers, aircraft. But no matter their system, working with entities want to increase the efficient operation of that system. Other sorts of objectives are considerably less important, blah, 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 blah. Looking for errors in the organizational. Here's my criticism pretty much with Kiersey. He mentions a lot of things that in a very generalized way are right, but it's too generalized. It's too vague. It's not tight enough. Because a lot of these things right here, you can see many people who would say that they do these things. And they would actually not come out as an NT. You could also see NTs who might dismiss some of this or go, well, yeah, but I mean, don't we all do this? Like, how is this really specific to me that I do this where others don't? Like, it's just too general. It's too vague. Um, like a lot of this stuff sounds very TE going on in here. And I can see many well-educated individuals, excuse me, well-educated individuals with TE or even TI, um, who would say that they do a lot of this stuff, even as part of their job or their career that they work in. Um, so you'd have a hard time demonstrating to some people how you're an NT because, oh, you think like this, you worry about these topics, and you're interested in order and organization and efficiency. And then you're going to try to tell some SJ or somebody that, well, you're not that interested in efficiency or order organization. Like you're not as into it as we are. And they would look at you like, what do you mean? So it becomes very, very tricky with this kind of language. And that's part of my problem with Kiersey. Um, he's not really wrong in a lot of his descriptions, but they're just not tight enough, and it's going to lead to a lot of mistyping stuff if you're using Kiersey.
Can you both see it?
Yep.
All right.
All right. I'm just wondering why
Which you
both
guys
of you are
kind of
not
talk about
moving
that a
much,
little bit
but,
there. Haley makes her points.
All right. I'll just put that
She makes her point.
That's as emphasized in me when I'm going about analysis.
Okay, well, she's gonna go on there. She kind of mentions that she's works in a lab, and this is one of my things with Kiersey. He really describes a very certain type of NT, which is kind of I'm gonna say our cliched version of an NT. The type of people who work in a lab like she does. Look at her with models of like brains in the on her, what is this, table back here, bed, whatever. You know, the very classic nerdy type of NT who would say that they were always interested in science, in just classic nerdy stuff. David Kiersey himself, Jr., right? Kiersey Jr. mentions that he was that classic nerd. That he was always interested in science and computers and things like that since he was a kid. And he also mentions that he became kind of the archetype for what an INTP is for his father when his father was writing these profiles. And when you listen to Kiersey Jr., when you watch him on these kind of interviews and these channels and things, he pops up. I mean, he comes across as your cliched nerd, like you're cliched from a TV show kind of nerd. And he himself he says that he's an uber NTP, uber nerd. And I agree. That's fine, but the problem is that it paints an archetype of NTs as being these uber classic nerds, and you're gonna miss a number of people who are NTs but don't behave that way. They're not the person who would say I was always interested in science and things like that from the time I was small. So I have an issue with that. You're not going to get a bunch of NTs that do other things. There's some NTs like I was mentioning the Duke of Wellington in one of the videos that he's often thought of as like an LIE, which I think is probably about right. And there's a guy there who went into the military because of his circumstances and everything else. He went into the army, the old British army, and his claim to fame is military success against Napoleon. There's a guy there that was not going to tell you of interests of science, or at least we're not going to see that in any kind of historical reference. Who knows if he was interested in any of those other things we saw on that previous page. Now, maybe he tells you he was interested in like the organization of the military and making it more efficient or whatever. Maybe, but it's hard to tell. And who's to say that some other type, a non-NT, was also interested in organizing stuff, right? Napoleon was, but he's seen by many as an SLE. And he obviously organized and created a core system, and he wanted efficiency in that system. So this is the vagueness of Kiersey that I struggle with if you're dealing with him.
Almost a
And I guess this is my moment to also plug, hey, Ben's channel for people watching. If anybody else is watching this, like check out his channel. He's got a lot of stuff on here. He hosts with a lot of people. A lot of people. He brings a lot of people and a lot of impressive characters onto his channel. Ben, I don't know how you lure them in, but you do. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. Again, talking about the same stuff here. All right.
Is in short supply. How do we make them all? How do we get all the parts? How do we organize everything? So it tends towards being static and just doing the same thing again and again and getting very good at it and bringing the costs down. And an example of this we can come up with later on is there was a guy in the Soviet Union, Morozov, and he helped on the development of the Soviet tank T-34. I haven't got the control panel, so I can't kill any sound. So he helped with the development of the T-34 tank. And so he got a lot of prestige from that. And then after World War II, Khrushchev didn't want any heavy tanks. And so he said that, you got to produce a medium tank. And so in order to produce this medium tank, Morozov in the Ukraine, in Kharkov, he went back there from Ural-Vagonzavod. He designed the tank, but with so many new technologies. So from an NTP point of view, it's like, yeah, let's have all these technologies. Let's get all this great design. The problem was implementation. Stuff was untested. You tried to have an opposed piston design where it doesn't work very well. And so this balance between being innovative in designing something and then being actually able to implement it. And in Kersey, the NTPs are more towards the innovation and perfecting a design, and the NTJs are more towards the practical application and implementation and organization of those complex systems.
Okay, that part there, I agree that yeah, your NTJs are probably a lot better at implementing what's available, what's already there, or having foresight to see what research and development is being done that can be utilized effectively, quickly, integrated quickly and effectively. And your NTPs are less suited for that because of that NE that is just much more interested in more ideas and what else can I throw in here? What more can I do? And that can get in the way. But again, that would make sense if we've already identified the type and we're just talking about roles now. So if we've already identified the type and we know that we have some ENTJs and INTJs and we have some INTPs and ENTPs, and we're just saying, okay, since we know this, we're going to assign you roles based on what we think you're good at, then okay, you NTPs are going to go over here to R&D, and NTJs, you guys are going to come over here to implementation kind of roles and so on, and probably to supervise the NTPs, because those NTPs are going to be like, it's going to be a fun house in there of all kinds of crap they're making. So somebody has to kind of rein them in. And then likewise, the NTPs can every once in a while like teach you NTJs what the hell they just came up with, so you can figure out what they've been up to in there. But my problem with that is, again, you have to already know the types. You have to get it down. B, we now have to accept kind of some kind of dystopia where we're assigning people roles based on what we think they'd be good at. And that's just not the way the world works. And it's probably not something we'd want anyway, because we don't want to force people into roles. We want freedom of choice. Let people go where they go, you know? So it starts to become kind of not so helpful.
Do you think that's fair to say, Haley?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I would. And again, I mean, if I'm ever trying to make something or, you know, go about that, that is, I mean, will it work? That's what matters. I mean, how can I make this work? That's the whole point of me doing this. I mean, yeah, oh, look, I created this cool thing. Great. Does it work? I mean, but again, I have to agree with
you know, again, does it work? Yeah, I would agree. But I think a lot of other types would also say, yeah, I think about, does it work? They would also say, I think about some other stuff too. So maybe this part is really more about saying, well, some NTJs are probably going to care more about, does it work, at the cost of other things. They're going to be more than likely less concerned about how do people feel about it. This is kind of like TE over FE type of thing. And TE over FI, the dichotomy thing. But also from like a socionics point of view, like you can't share the same space with TE and FE. They'd be like mutually opposing. So it's just, as to put it more simply, it's, I value the logical effectiveness and efficiency of this system, and I don't care how anyone feels about it or anyone's complaints or anything else about it, which tends to be the problem, right? Maybe some other types would argue, well, yeah, I care about effective and efficiency, but I still care about how people feel about it. I'm still going to factor that in a little bit. I'm going to give that some attention. You know, there are many types that are going to do that, especially in a socionics point of view. I bet if you asked SLEs, they're going to be like, I care about how well it works. Does it work? And I don't give a shit how people feel about it. And I'll try to just convince them to like it more. I'll try to sell them on it. So, you know, again, we're back to this very difficult generalized language, this descriptive stuff that many people would agree with, perhaps for different reasons, but they are going to kind of agree with it. And this doesn't help us really identify your type particularly well, unless you are, again, fitting in the classic uber nerd. Those are the only ones that are going to really, really stand out. I'm curious a little bit about Haley's story here, because I'm aware that she's supposed to be an INTJ and is a hardcore INTJ that did a lot of research on fitness and exercise and all this stuff, and was ahead of these so-called experts. I've heard that story before. But she's one of these interesting characters who is somebody who works in a field of like bodybuilding and all this kind of stuff that does not seem like an area where an INTJ would go, because she in fact would on the surface look like she's maybe some kind of an ESFP or something, and then she's working around probably a lot of other ESFP types or other SPs and whatnot, and it just looks like an SP dominated environment, yet she's supposed to be very much an INTJ. So it's interesting to kind of hear how in her case she knew she was an INTJ, or it became pretty obvious that she was an INTJ that just happens to work in a very SP-ish kind of environment. It sounds to me like she actually sounds a bit like your classic NTJ type of personality who does extensive amounts of research, very data driven, and wants to do that data driven on her own. You know, she's checking off all those kinds of nerdy boxes, very, very hardcore. So I'm curious mostly because of my own, you know, just trying to compare it to myself, and just kind of see how those sort of stories line up. So anyway, that's why.
Said earlier regarding, everyone can do this. Maybe in some instances, certain types, learn to do it over time, and maybe it's prioritized more in other types. But I think maybe I'm a little bit biased because I feel like I've always kind of done this. So it's hard for me to take a step out of that and be like, okay, well, not everyone does things the way that you do. So
yeah, I mean, what we're saying now about social systems. I mean, TI with FE, we could say, analyzing people and putting them into a system. So we've got Kersey here, Beren, Skalenko, Naranjo has been typed as TI and X, and then Alshra, Bukalov, Wiseman, maybe Catherine Farber.
Okay.
Meaning by the term network, netics.
Hold on, screwed that up. So my first point that was a big deal, it kind of on what Haley was saying there. There's a lot of I think there's a lot of things that we as an individual do that we sort of take for granted. We just expect everyone else kind of does it too. And that could lead to problems on like how you type yourself or how you see yourself. Some of these things like NI-ish type of stuff, cause and effect, studying the history of things and why something goes from here to there, where things are probably going. It's very, to me, I feel like it's not that hard. It's not that big a deal. And I realize that I might be underestimating how it is difficult for other people to do that, how other types have very poor NI and they have this high impulse control issues with SE. And so I don't understand why they're making bad decisions and doing really stupid shit. And so to me, I end up kind of going, well, I don't think my NI is really that high. I think it's pretty, it's not that big a deal. And I end up underestimating how much stronger my NI is maybe than other types, and I'm saying that I'm sure that's probably something that many other people do when they're reading this kind of stuff, and then they end up getting to the wrong type. They don't realize that they're actually very good at a particular element or cognitive function. They just kind of take it for granted. That's what I'm trying to say there. And the example of TIFE, with all of these particular social scientists who came up with a lot of this stuff, yeah, obviously this is very great demonstration of TIFE, but these are very unusual people who came up with these systems and things. And so obviously, yeah, we're seeing the TIFE, but there's so many people who likely have TIFE and strong TI who don't ever bother to get into all this stuff, or they never get into anything that's published, or they never get into anything like this. They just don't go this far. So that's kind of the problem of using I'm going to call it exceptional people, exceptional celebrities, as the standard bearer for what makes sort of TIFE. It's just, it's not helpful for the typing process, I think. It's sort of like people saying, well, Albert Einstein is likely an NTP. So now you have to compare yourself to Albert Einstein. And then you sit there and go, well, I'm not really interested in physics, and I'm not that big of a genius like that who contemplates particles and so forth. Well, I must not be an NT then. And it could lead to mistypings and stuff also.
Governance, cyber, that is network control. He made his concept of cybernetics intelligible to those not conversant with systems theory by borrowing the term feedback from radio technology and using it as a metaphor for circular processes in systems.
Now, I like this part because I guess I would relate to this. I feel like I have done very well at teaching and explaining things to people and breaking down complicated science and theory and stuff and reducing it to something simple. I always kind of valued Einstein's ideas on you need to be able to take a concept and simplify it so you could teach it to your grandmother. You could talk to your grandmother about it and get her to understand it. And when you're able to simplify a concept like that, that's the true mark of genius. That's the true mark of intelligence and understanding. When people overcomplicate stuff, that to me is a flaw. That's a failure. That is, you don't understand the system well enough. So every time I hear typology, people going on and on and on about different functions and elements, and they're adding more things and overcomplicating stuff, and then you have to bring this in and then that in and then everything. It's just like, no, your system is too complicated. And it's either coming across like your system is broken and fucked up, or you don't even understand how to really put it together. Because if you did, you would be able to simplify this concept enough for me that you could explain it away in a few short sentences. It shouldn't be this hard. So anyway, there's that. So this whole breaking things down. Again, this video is going to get out of control, so I don't want it to take too long here. Order and organization. This idea that the NTJs are usually better at order and sequential order and so on, and the NTPs are going to be better at the organization, at understanding how the system works. I suppose maybe this is kind of tricky because I think that, again, the NTs are all going to probably be pretty good at both, and they may have a hard time figuring out which one they're better at. Or even determining if they are better at one more than the other. So now we're back to, again, having a hard time deciphering which kind of NT you are. Now, Kiersey kind of got away with trying to be so exacting about which type. He kind of was saying that it's a little bit irrelevant because he's like, look, what matters is really your temperament. You're either an NT or you're an SJ or you're an SP, and that's good enough. It doesn't really matter that much to drill down into the very specific kind of NT. But let's face it, we do want to know the differences. We as individuals want to know which kind of NT am I. And if we take an approach like a socionics approach, it does matter which NT I am. Being an INTP is not the same thing as being an ENTJ. You're talking about different quadras, different quadra values, a very different sort of disposition towards people and things. So it does make a difference. It does really matter. And if you want to go into intertype relations and all that other stuff, it again matters. The types of people NTPs get along with and want to get along with are going to be different than the sort of people that NTJs get along with. So my point is the individual type matters. And Kiersey doesn't do a very good job of making it easy for you to figure that out. And I kind of want to wrap this up. I'll probably talk more about this in just a different video and maybe just chop this up because I'm kind of being cautious of like not having a 2-hour monstrosity. But one more piece I'll throw in there. These are the chapters where Kiersey's talking about rationals versus guardians versus artisans, and so on. And he's discussing the general things that people like to do, that people tend to focus on, and how they sort of approach school and everything else. From those descriptions, I could relate heavily to SPs. I could check off a lot of things on SPs. Things like just, not being interested in school, preferring to work a little bit more hands-on, more physical kind of things, being interested in the arts, doing a lot of arts things, theater, sports stuff, being interested in military things, being interested in martial art things, like all of those stuff. I've done all of them. And not just for like a short little project. I mean, I spent years in all of those areas, check. So in a lot of ways from these basic descriptions, I could check off an enormous amount of SPs. I could also check off a number of things here from the NTs, but I could probably get more from the SP stuff. Yet, if I were to really sort of type and try to test to see, am I really an SP or am I more of an NT? Probably end up more on the NT side, using a different system. So there's a lot of stuff on here that, again, it makes it kind of tricky to use as a typing system. It works really well when you run into people that are more clear-cut archetypes. They're almost caricatures of these certain types. It gets kind of tricky and pretty annoying if you're not. So I'm a little curious if Haley was one of those people that had a little trouble at first, or if she just knew right off the bat, because maybe in her mind she thinks like a classic INTJ, very, 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 very detailed and orderly and data driven and all this other stuff. Like maybe it was always obvious in her head. To me, it's not. But I have found that being able to do a lot of this sort of NT stuff to not be difficult. I did a lot of that stuff on my own as well. So yeah, so this is why it's just not easy. And again, for someone like myself, I could fit a few different boxes here, particularly SPNT. Really, those are the only two boxes. But so anyway, those are some of my thoughts on this stuff. Like I said, I'll probably make a little bit more. I just want to chop this up because it's just going to be incredibly long. So, hey, leave your comments again.